Hello everyone, my name is Sagardeep Rathi and I'll be your moderator as well as one of the co-speakers for today's webinar. On behalf of Khaitan and Company and our guest speakers this afternoon, I welcome you to this webinar. We hope that you and your friends and family are all well and keeping safe in these unprecedented times of our lives. We have entered the fourth phase of the lockdown in India, hopefully the last, and many other countries globally have taken similar actions to stop the spread of this pandemic. Today's webinar will provide you an insight into competition issues which could arise in the wake of COVID-19. With the extraordinary challenges that this pandemic has brought upon us, businesses are planning their course of action to resume operations, which is now the new normal. The speakers will therefore focus on what could go wrong from a competition law perspective and the best practices that should be followed. Before we begin, a few housekeeping rules. This webinar will have two parts. In the first one, for about 45 to 50 minutes, we'll have presentations by our panelists, and this will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A session in which we'll answer questions from you. You may send us your live questions by typing them in the question box in your webinar portal during the course of the webinar. Slide change. Now to start off, I would first like to introduce our guest speakers. We wish to extend a warm welcome to our guest speakers, Mr. Amit Bansal and Ms. Shruti Gupta. Amit serves as a partner in the Forensic Financial Advisory team at Deloitte. In his 25 years of experience, he has led over 250 engagements covering probing allegations of inappropriate award of contract, fraudulent transactions, improprieties of conduct in business operations, financial misreporting, allegations of corruption, and supply chain assessments. Amit is a regular speaker in professional forums, and today he'll be enlightening us with his experience, which is a pivotal part of antitrust investigations. Shruti is an associate director in the Forensic Financial Advisory team at Deloitte. Shruti has a diverse experience of over 10 years across large organizations focused on economic and financial analysis relating to antitrust, economic regulation, and damage claim estimation. Our guest speakers will provide their insights on the economic and forensic aspects of certain important issues that we wish to discuss today. Now from our in-house KCO speakers, we have my colleague, Ms. Anisha Chand, who is a partner in the competition antitrust team and works out of the Mumbai office. Anisha advises domestic and multinational companies on a full spectrum of competition law matters and has extensive merger control experience through involvement in challenging M&A deals. Very recently, she was recognized by Global Competition Review in their 40 under 40 list of top young antitrust lawyers in the world. She's also the youngest lawyer in that list. As for myself, I'm a partner at the Khaitan Company's competition antitrust practice based out of the New Delhi office and have been advising domestic and international clients on a wide range of competition law issues in both enforcement and merger control provisions, and have successfully represented clients both before the CCI as well as the appellate tribunals. Slide change. I will now quickly run through the agenda for the session. We will start with a snapshot of the impact of the pandemic on Indian industries to set the tone for possible competition law concerns. Second, we'll provide a brief overview of the Indian competition law regime and an overview of the advisories that the regulators around the world, including the CCI, have published. Having highlighted various nuances of competition law, we will discuss collaborations between competitors and tackling supply chain issues. We will then discuss various do's and don'ts for businesses to operate in the new normal. After that, we will also highlight some key concerns and best practices for businesses that are dominant in their respective markets and take you through some of the economic aspects. We will also explore mergers and acquisitions and how the pandemic may reshape this regime. And lastly, we will discuss some aspects from a forensic point of view. Slide change. As we are all aware, COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed a devastating blow to the global economy, disrupting supply chains and choking off demand. The pandemic has adversely affected certain sectors, including those with high fixed costs, while some sectors by nature of their business have been able to continue operations. There are a few sectors which have been the outliers and would be able to bounce back quickly. For example, the automobile, hospitality, and the entertainment industry have recorded negligible sales owing to the lockdown. Sectors such as retail of essential products, e-commerce, and pharma have been seeing growing sales. While these sectors have also faced challenges in their supply chain, but they have been able to cope with the changes in the logistics systems. On the buyer side, also, we are seeing an emergence of a new buying behavior as consumers who preferred to buy offline are now shifting to the online regime. With this background, I will now invite our guest speaker, Amit, to shed some light on how the overall market has been rehauled post the insurgence of COVID-19. Slide change.
Thank you so much, Sagar. Thank you so much, Sagar, for your introduction and the enlightening words. We indeed are living in very difficult and very unprecedented times. The industry has been impacted in a manner which we have not seen for the last 50 or 60 years. The last time the industry was impacted to this level was probably around the Great Depression, 1929 to 1935 kind of a period, or maybe around the Spanish pandemic, the Spanish flu times around 1918, 1920. So when we say the industry has been impacted, what do we really mean? As Sagar clearly highlighted, some of these sectors are virtually shut down. Airlines, hospitality, automobiles is virtually zero sales for the last couple of months. Now, when we talk of competition, there are two things which we need to keep in mind. One is the current period where there is a significant disruption for during the period of lockdown, and the other is once the lockdown opens and things slowly start happening, the businesses start coming back to life. Some of the impact and some of the changes which may happen during the lockdown period may have a permanent and a long-term impact in terms of consumer behavior, in terms of market structures, in terms of the sales and distribution structures. Some of it will get changed forever. Some of it may actually get changed, and there could be a lot of realignments in supply chain, in distribution agreements, and in various other aspects. And that is where looking at the economic assessment part of it, and as also whether any particular conduct is in violation of the competition law will become very, very critical, and will become may become a little difficult to assess, given we will be living in a new market structure. What do I mean by that? Let's talk of a situation. Let's talk of a hypothetical situation of the airline industry. Like today, we have 5 or 6 players in the Indian market. Now, let's say there is a merger which gets announced amongst, let's say, a larger player and a smaller player. How does one view it? What is the relevant market? Should the old market shares be looked at, or during the lockdown period when there is zero sales, zero market share, or what is expected post lockdown? Post lockdown, the market may be very, very different as compared to what it was pre-lockdown, and that is where the law will get tested, the economic assessment will get tested, and a lot of the aspects will need to be re-looked at. A lot of the agreements will need to be looked at. A lot of the business models may need to be re-looked at. While looking at it, may be very, very important to keep some of the concerns which may emanate from competition law, and that is where my friends Sagar and Anisha will highlight what those concerns could be and how they need to be taken care of. And I will hand it over back to Sagar and Anisha.
Well, thank you, Amit, for setting the context for this conversation. I will now hand over to my colleague Anisha to very quickly give a brief background of the various substantive provisions of the Indian competition law, discuss the steps that the competition regulators around the world are taking, and then share her views on collaborations between competitors and tackling the supply chain issues. Over to you, Anisha.
Thank you, Sagar, and thank you, Amit, for setting the tone and tenor of our webinar today. And hello to all our viewers. So before delving into the advisories, like Sagar mentioned, I will quickly sort of take you through and refresh the substantive enforcement provisions under the Indian competition laws. So there are three main enforcement limbs under the Competition Act. One is anti-competitive agreements, which includes cartels. Second is abuse of dominant position. And the third is the merger control regime, which regulates mergers and acquisitions between companies that meet certain financial thresholds. Very briefly, agreements between competitors or entities which fall within different levels of the same supply chain, such as your customer, supplier, distributor agreements, which cause an appreciable adverse effect on competition in India, are called anti-competitive agreements. As you can see in the slide, horizontal agreements such as price fixing, bid rigging, limiting supply or dividing territories, or customers are presumed to cause appreciable adverse effect on competition. However, it is important to note that under the Indian law, this presumption is rebuttable. So an example of a cartel or of a horizontal agreement is, let's say there is a meeting between three FMCG companies to discuss discount strategy. That is an anti-competitive agreement. It will be seen as an agreement to fix prices. Now, vertical agreements, on the other hand, are tested against the rule of reason cornerstone. Examples of vertical agreements are all around us. So an agreement between your distributor for supply of goods, an agreement between a manufacturer and an e-commerce company, and all other such agreements which are entered into to make the product reach from the factory to the final consumer fall within the ambit of vertical agreements. And these agreements are known to be essential to the operations of a business, and therefore there is no presumption that they will cause an adverse impact on competition. However, there are some forms of restrictions, such as mandating a resale price, tying in a product, exclusivities, which could be problematic. However, again, I think the important point is that vertical agreements, the burden of proof lies with the Competition Commission of India and not on the parties. Just to make it clear, an example of a vertical agreement is an automobile manufacturer, if he instructs his dealers to not sell below a particular price, that could be problematic if it causes an AEC or adverse effect on competition, and that will be sort of called a resale price maintenance agreement. Now, when we assess vertical agreements, it's because it is not presumed to cause an AEC. There is a balance of certain pro-competitive and anti-competitive factors, which essentially looks at what are the benefits to the consumers, are you creating any entry barriers, so on and so forth. I will not go into it because Shruti will be later on explaining a lot more about it. So moving on to abuse of dominant position, as some of you would know, dominant position by itself is not prohibited under the Indian law. Its abuse, however, is what is prohibited. The Act, the Competition Act in India, it provides an exhaustive list of abusive conducts, which could include unfair or excessive pricing, denial of market access, leveraging, etc. These are the types. And again, as an example, if there is a dominant undertaking, let's say in the market for soft drinks, which imposes a single brand restriction on its distributors, which means that that particular distributor cannot deal in the soft drinks produced by other manufacturers, that could constitute abuse of dominant position, as it could likely be seen as denial of market access to other competing soft drink manufacturers. Merger control, very simply, it's a regime which is a regulatory regime. M&A transactions that meet certain thresholds, they need prior approval from the CCI, where no exemptions are applicable. So that's like a very quick capsule snapshot. And with this background, I'll walk you through some of the advisories that the competition agencies have released in some key jurisdictions with the view to offer some respite to the ailing industry. Next slide, please. Given the distortion in the market because of the pandemic, regulators around the world have recognized the need for coordination amongst competitors for better and smooth functioning of the market. However, the authorities have also cautioned that opportunism and exploitation of the COVID-19 situation will not be taken lightly and will attract special attention of the regulators. Now, jurisdictions like US and European Union, which are much more matured, have in fact published detailed frameworks and are also issuing comfort letters to assist businesses in their move to collaborate. However, again, these relaxations are not like a free pass, and they cannot be used to flout competition laws, and are only applicable when these collaborations are absolutely and objectively necessary. They are proportionate to respond to the predicament in question, and are temporary in nature. A live example is the European Commission giving a comfort letter to an association of generic pharmaceutical manufacturers who were allowed to cooperate in order to be able to respond to the shortages in essential medicines required for COVID-19 patients. A clear guideline on the do's and don'ts, along with safeguards, were in fact prescribed by the European Commission. So like its peers, the CCI has also risen to the occasion and has also issued a similar advisory in April. It recognizes that the COVID situation may require the need to coordinate on several aspects, such as data sharing relating to stock levels, timings of operations, details of distribution network, etc. And this is, of course, intended so that there is seamless supply of medical products, supplies, and other essential services. The CCI, amongst other things, has also highlighted the built-in safeguards contained under the Indian statute, which would protect businesses from sanctions for certain coordinated conduct, which is efficiency enhancing. And one such example, which constitutes a safe harbor, is the joint venture defense or a competitor cooperation defense that results in production or distribution efficiencies. And like I mentioned earlier, even cartels in India are not per se legal. It's just presumed to cause an AEC, which is fully rebuttable. Vertical restraints and abuse of dominance continue to be determined based on rule of reason test and the objective justification test. Without prejudice to this, this soft touch approach that the Commission has adopted, they have simultaneously cautioned that the advisory is not a get out of jail free card, and therefore it will be vigilant to keep anti-competitive conduct in check during this time, and any exploitative conduct would not be taken lightly. And of course, this is no surprise, since the applicability of competition laws become more important given the gravity of the situation, and as anti-competitive conduct of businesses can basically further dampen an already suffering economy. It is, of course, however, noteworthy that the CCI has been operational all throughout this entire lockdown and has been allowing pre-filing consultations, video conferencing, and electronic filing of not just M&A merger notices, but also new information and complaints. So on this positive note, I shall now segue into our next topic that deals with the contours of collaboration and cooperation with competitors. Please. During the subsistence of COVID-19, or till such time the COVID impact lurks around, businesses may like to recalibrate their business policies. Just like Amit had mentioned, there will be realignment, there will be recalibration. And because of that, they may enter into novel types of collaborations, which potentially could have been problematic in ordinary circumstances. However, the CCI could possibly now allow entities to indulge in such collaborations to be able to address the impact, subject to, of course, the caveats that have been mentioned in the advisory. So certain situations where businesses may like to sort of cooperate or coordinate their acts, and that could potentially be legitimate, are, for instance, pooling of logistics and distribution networks to address supply chain bottlenecks. So, for instance, shortage of trucks and interstate transport restrictions, manufacturers of bulky goods may plan to pool resources for transportation with other manufacturers in order to optimize the cost of transportation and avoid inefficiencies. Since the general demand, except for certain obvious products, is witnessing a slowdown, it may not make sense for businesses to send a half-filled shipment or truck. Thus, to optimize the freight cost, logistic costs, the businesses may look to collaborate for goods of the same size and weight. So similarly, there could be a lot of realigning of policies on non-price variables. So again, to take an example, insurance companies, they may want to align their responses to claims under existing policies, or the terms and conditions, excluding premium, because premium becomes a price variable of the new policies. However, this will also be probably subject to the regulations and the guidelines issued by the insurance regulator, which is the IRIDA, which may sort of also come up with certain guidelines that may regulate this behavior. Similarly, travel websites or agents may collaborate on claims they would like to cover or conditions for reimbursements to customers in case the customer gets infected with a virus. This again is subject to similar government regulation that may also regulate similar conduct or behavior. Joint development and R&D. Now, this is an interesting one because we have seen recently that in order to mitigate the impact of COVID-19, a lot of these pharmaceutical companies have teamed up to create or co-develop a vaccine. So Pfizer and BioNTech have joined forces. Similarly, Apple and Google, which are considered to be arch rivals in the tech space, have teamed up to develop a software for health authorities to be able to trace carriers of infection. I think another live example is it comes from the US, where 5 entities engaged in manufacturing personal protective gear, face masks, gloves, etc., were allowed to coordinate in order to expedite manufacturing, sourcing, and distribution of essential medical supplies in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. Such collaborations may also be allowed in India as they are aimed at addressing the crisis. That said, collaborations or any sort of cooperation on hardcore competitively sensitive variables such as price, output, volume of production, while these may appear to be tempting as a tempting option for post-COVID recovery, it must be undertaken only if they're objectively necessary to combat the impact. And in fact, as an example, the comfort letter that was issued by the European Commission to the Association of Medicines of Europe that I had alluded to earlier does not explicitly, in its comfort letter, it explicitly does not permit exchange of pricing information and goes one step ahead to warn against price increases that are not justified by increased production costs. I think this clearly indicates that the coordination should be confined between the prescribed agreed legal boundaries and should not be used as a disguise to exchange competitively sensitive information. On the contrary, certain collaborations could be seen as completely as, as taking advantage of the crisis. And such situations could be entering into discussions with competitors aimed at recouping losses, such as fixing prices or reducing discounts. This may definitely be risky and more often than not could amount to taking advantage of the situation. However, if you're recouping losses in your individual capacity, depending on how the market is functioning and not in consonance with a competitor, this could be completely kosher. For instance, like Amit had mentioned, the airline industry where social distancing norms are definitely going to come into the play, airlines may want to collaborate on ticket prices. However, these may not be considered legitimate as they end up charging excessive. This could probably end up charging excessively from the customers. Similarly, discussions with competitors on a joint purchase of raw material may also be viewed anti-competitive and can open avenues for exchange of price-sensitive information. It could also lead to exploiting the seller by forcing him to lower prices by exercising joint countervailing power. Thus, what is of utmost importance is to bear in mind that collaborations should be objectively necessary, proportionate, and aimed at addressing the hardship caused by the crisis. Such collaborations must therefore be undertaken with expert legal help to avoid violation of any competition laws. Having explored collaborations with competitors, let us now just go on to vertical agreements and see how supply chain issues can be tackled. Next slide, please. As we all agree and as we are witnessing, the COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing lockdown has disrupted supply chains like never before for many industries. And as a way forward, these industries, as an immediate step, could possibly look to rebuild their supply chain and logistics. Now, these disruptions may lead to greater imposition of vertical restraints on distributors, for instance, in order to have more control over the distribution line or the entire distribution network. Manufacturers may also want to limit intra-brand competition within their own brand of products, within their own distribution network. And to ensure this, there could be territorial exclusivity restrictions that could be imposed. Similarly, it is a good time and the companies may resort to tie in non-essential products with products that are selling, that are in greater demand, that are essential, in order to spur the sales of non-essential products and capture market share for such product. Similarly, manufacturers may incentivize and support distributors, for distributors through investments, and may enforce certain vertical restraints like exclusive agreements to ensure return on their investments to prevent free riding. A very quick example to tell you about how exclusivity works is, let's say a pharmaceutical company enters into an exclusive agreement with an online delivery platform to facilitate deliveries. Now, in this case, this agreement addresses the need for smoother deliveries for essential medicines and helps consumer access the products with ease. However, the exclusivity in the agreement might restrict the market for pharmaceutical products that are produced by competitor A to only online platform X, which means that other online platforms are denied market access to that particular product. And if the pharmaceutical company has that kind of market power, then it could result in foreclosure effects or could adversely impact the market. So therefore, certain considerations that become important and assume significance in the context of vertical restraints would be that the CCI will also consider the COVID-19 impact while employing the rule of reason test that is applicable to vertical agreements. For example, certain restrictions which may have been allowed in the pre-COVID era may not be allowed in the changed business landscape if they have a negative impact on competition. For instance, restrictions imposed on distributors not to deal in competitors' products may be seen as anti-competitive, especially when the distribution channels are already facing a constraint. Therefore, existing governance must be revisited to ensure compliances as businesses sort of move forward towards a post-COVID scenario. Similarly, due care has to be taken while imposing stringent restrictions like exclusivity, and it is always prudent to have these agreements vetted by legal counsel. Now, two quick examples that I want to share with you, which are very, very topical and very recent, is one that has happened in Korea, where the Korean Fair Trade Commission raided pharmaceutical companies and consumer goods sellers on suspicions that they were bundling face masks with other products. Such kind of products may also be problematic under Indian law. Similarly, Turkey has recently, just last week, commenced investigation against 29 FMCG companies, which include big names like Nivea, Johnson & Johnson's, HUL, etc., on allegations of price inflation during COVID. Now, having said that, it is necessary, and this cannot be stressed enough, that all of these restrictions, even if they lead to efficiencies, will be considered pro-competitive only if they're objectively necessary and are temporary in nature. And if there is any deviation, it needs to be for a short-term period to be compatible with competition law. If it continues for a time period which is unwarranted or beyond what is necessary, it may come under the CCI scanner. As such, these golden rules that I've just discussed on collaborations and supply chain issues can be summed up in certain do's and don'ts, which I will request Sagar to now take up.
Well, thank you, Nisha, for taking us to these issues that are very pertinent from the perspective of Section 3 of the Act, and also the various initiatives taken by the antitrust authorities globally and by the CCI. Now, having broadly understood the potential competitive landscape post-COVID and the requisite caution needed when entering into agreements, we can sum up what Anisha spoke by way of the following do's and don'ts that will ensure compliance with antitrust laws. Slide change, please. On the PPT slide, you'll see some ticks in green, crosses in red, effectively meaning what is right and wrong under the Act. And these become all the more important today because we're all working virtually through various modes of technology. How this new age working can be good or bad is something I'll leave it to our guest expert, Shruti, to deal in her part of the presentation. Moving on specifically, what is it that you can do or cannot do in order to be on the right side of the Competition Act? It is advisable to enter into only such collaborations that have efficiency or pro-competitive purpose, which cannot be achieved alone. For example, coordination of manufacturing efforts or logistic networks to facilitate production or distribution of essential services aimed at satisfying the demand linked to a health crisis. Nisha had dealt with that in detail. It is very essential to document such minutes of meetings or any studies or papers which show that the desired objective could not be achieved alone and a collaboration was essential. Any meetings between competitors should have a prefixed agenda, which should be reviewed by legal counsel in order to mitigate risks of non-compliance of competition law. It is also essential that you create firewalls when collaborating with competitors to ensure prevention of information leakage on any matter beyond what is strictly necessary for the scope of such a collaboration. Please assess whether the desired objective is necessary and proportionate to the desired purpose. Now, this could be ensured by not having exclusivity or carefully entering into exclusive agreements. Again, the rule of reason test applies there. Collaborations and restrictions must be limited in time and in geography for the duration to be defined by this pandemic. Moreover, the scope of the collaborations or any vertical restrictions should be regularly checked to ensure that the scope has not changed than what it was intended before it in the wake of the dynamic economic demand and supply situations. And in case the scope has changed, businesses should re-evaluate the necessity of collaboration to ensure any excessively restrictive conditions that are imposed. Do not use the collaboration with competitors as a platform to exchange commercially sensitive information outside the scope of the collaboration. And I think all the authorities globally have stressed this point enough. And do not impose stringent restrictions on resale price like mandatory pricing without careful legal vetting. In fact, even imposition of softer restrictions should be vetted by legal counsel. Slide change, please. I will now move on to another important substantive provision of the Indian Competition Act, which is abuse of dominant position and the challenges that dominant players may have if they abuse their market positions. Now, as stated by Nisha in the overview of the law provides that no company or group shall abuse its position of dominance in the market. Although dominance per se is not bad, however, there are certain factors that are laid down under the Act for the CCI to assess whether this particular dominance would result in an abuse. And the problem arises when a dominant entity engages in imposing any unfair or discriminatory conditions, and this conduct then becomes punishable under the Act. In the post-COVID-19 scenario, we might see dominant players charging excessive prices, enforcing unfair contractual terms to recoup losses, and streamlining businesses from the negative impact of the pandemic. These practices could be regarded as exploitative by the competition authority if they meet the criteria laid down under the Act. And for the benefit of all our listeners here, we're broadly covering three kinds of such practices that can lead into an abuse of dominance. First one being price gouging. For example, charging excessive prices in order to capitalize the demand-supply mismatch without any objective justification will be problematic. Indulging into any exclusionary conduct leading to ousting of competitors in the relevant market. Some big players can really use their might and deep pockets to control the supply chains, thereby ousting the smaller competitors. The next head would broadly be categorized as unfair and discriminatory terms. Now, dominant players could also impose unfair contractual terms, which could lead to dampening of competition in the downstream market. For instance, discrimination between customers, charging different prices or applying different terms to different suppliers or vendors, refusing to supply to certain consumers. Although there could be an objective justification in this context, might include difficulties in meeting all the demand a supplier faces, and therefore choosing to supply regular customers and the existing contracts rather than spot customers. However, again, that's an analysis that the commission will do, and something that the commission finds odd can certainly be investigated. Imposition of unfair and unilateral contract terms on distributors or customers. Making purchase of goods or services in demand conditional on the purchase of other goods and services. Or unfairly invoking force majeure or frustration clauses in order to not fulfill contractual obligations. For example, enforcing the force majeure clause to defer payments of vendors and suppliers. In the same example, if the clause is invoked selectively against only a few suppliers, thereby discriminating against other suppliers or vendors, that could certainly cause problems under the law. The third one is leveraging. In simple terms, leveraging would mean companies using their position of dominance in one market to enter into another market, and this could well fall within the domain of abuse. It is seen that some players have been able to sail through the COVID impact due to continuous demands of their products. Slide change, please. And with that background, let's have a quick look at a few of the best practices for dominant players. Again, the greens and the reds, the do's and the don'ts here specifically. As already indicated, dominant enterprises have a special responsibility towards maintaining healthy competition in the market. And it is of utmost importance that dominant players exercise caution while indulging in conditions such as those discussed in this previous slide. To this effect, dominant entities should document such studies or minutes of meetings which can justify changes in prices or policies by indicating the desired objective behind imposing a restriction. It is also important to carefully assess whether the objective could be achieved without imposing these restrictive conditions, or they could possibly be less restrictive. Not create any entry barriers or oust specific competitors from the market owing to their special responsibility. Do not change policies for a period longer than the duration required to recoup the losses. And it is always advised that such changes in agreements or introduction of new policies be vetted by legal counsel to ensure compliance. I will now request Shruti to share her thoughts on the economic analysis required when discussing the complexities of the relevant markets in the rule of reason test.
Thank you, Sagar, and to all the attendees for joining us for this webinar. So, connecting to the points that the panelists have made regarding the distortions that we are seeing around us in different forms and shapes, be it new distribution arrangements, be it alternative sourcing of raw material, or foray into adjacent products. For example, we are seeing FMCG companies wanting to make sanitizer and other hygiene products. What I'm going to focus on is what does it mean for businesses from assessment perspective. The advisory which Anisha spoke of, issued by the CCI, is in line with other competition regulators and is indeed a welcome move. However, what I would like to emphasize here from a practical guidance perspective to businesses is that the exemption provided is not blanket. It's not blanket in the sense that the commission will still assess your conduct on the basis of necessity as well as proportionality. Now, it may sound Greek to you, so what does that mean? This in turn means that the inbuilt safeguard that is available to us in the Act in terms of the appreciable adverse effect on competition, which Anisha referred to as the rule of reason test, will be applied irrespectively. That is, the exemptions have been given to you. However, that doesn't change the scheme of the Act, and it will still be viewed from the lens of the rule of reason test, wherein the burden of proof will be on the businesses. Section 19(3) of the Act provides the framework in terms of what sort of factors that the Commission will look into for the purposes of this test. In a nutshell, if I were to describe it, it's a weighing off of the potential benefits that may result from your conduct as against the harm that there may be, the possibilities of which there may be. I will talk about some considerations that may be viewed differently in the context of pre and post-COVID markets. And please note that some of these dimensions would be relevant in the context of both Section 3 as well as Section 4 investigations that may happen. So let's start with relevant market. Now, with COVID-19 and the lockdown restrictions getting imposed on us, we are seeing a lot of shifts in how consumers are shopping. There is a tremendous shift in, if you were to ask me, would I want to go to a store next door, or I would rather, purchase it online? Does that mean that the e-commerce players can still argue online markets would be constrained by offline brick and mortar stores? We don't know. We don't know. The impact is going to be there for some time. Even if with the removal of restrictions, we are not sure how the consumers are going to respond to those changes. So the key point to be taken from here is that the traditional case precedents may no longer apply in the post-COVID scenario. An assessment would need to be carried out to see what sort of competition constraints are in place given the current market context. Related to that, from a dominance assessment perspective, depending upon the outcomes that are reached on the relevant market size, the market structure and your position in the market may undergo a significant change. Again, taking a very routine example, previously it could be that you had 10 vendors for sourcing milk. Could be a local milk vendor, could be through online, could be you wanting to go to the retail store next door, the kirana stores that we call. However, in the lockdown period, that number may have come from 5 to 1 supplier. So that means that your market position may have changed. Here, the recommendation would be to carefully assess what your market position is in the current context of schemes. And as I think Sagar also mentioned, that the abuse of dominance provisions are form-based provisions. So if you are found to be in a dominant position, there will be little defense available if the conduct is one of the prohibitions contained in the Act in terms of tie-ins, in terms of imposition of unfair pricing. With respect to agreements and other horizontal agreements as well as vertical agreements, I will not reiterate the do's and the don'ts that Sagar spoke of. One advice that I would like to give here is that market impacts tend to be sticky. And what I mean by that is to say that, yes, of course, you may have agreed to collaborate with your competitor for a period of 3 months. The impact may play out for 6 months. So there the advice would be to have all your documents, all your collaboration mechanisms well documented, so that 6 months later, if the situation evolves that the commission is investigating, you would have all the relevant evidences and proof with yourself available. With respect to vertical agreements, other unfair pricing conduct, retail price maintenance, tying and bundling, the rule of reason, the AE test will continue to apply. Again, sort of continuing the online markets example, ensuring supply to consumers during the lockdown phase may qualify as a benefit. And you may be able to, wanting to march to the commission, look, this is what I delivered. This is how consumers were happy. We could ensure access. However, at the same time, please be mindful that the commission would at the same time be evaluating all the negatives. Did you do unnecessary time? Did you say that I am going to supply you detergent if only you are going to buy 5 packets? I will supply you detergent only if you also buy soaps from me. So that sort of bundling and time may come into picture and may form part of commission's analysis. The bottom line, the point that I'm trying to make here is that caution would need to be exercised with respect to any alteration that you would like to do in your business behavior, where demand and supply induced shocks may not provide a justifiable defense. And therefore, please watch out for the impact on the assessment side. So this is what I wanted to say. Back to you, Sagar.
Thanks a lot, Shruti. I think at this point we've discussed all possible collaboration and the conduct in the post-COVID world and the economic analysis that is required. Crisis always brings opportunities, and it is likely to result in an increase in M&A activity across the globe. While I understand there are some time constraints at hand, however, I'll request Anisha to take us through various opportunities from a merger control perspective.
Thanks, Sagar. So in the COVID and post-COVID era, distressed M&A or fire sales is bound to increase. Several sectors will witness consolidation, with solvent companies having deep pockets already scouting for quality assets which are suffering hardships and almost bleeding out. So acquisition in concentrated markets may raise issues of apparent competitive harm. However, a defense that can come to our rescue and help in diluting these concerns is what we call the failing firm defense. And broadly speaking, this is a defense that allows mergers to sail through despite apparent competitive harms. This is one of the factors that is listed in the Competition Act to evaluate even ordinary M&A transactions. But to successfully argue failing firm defense, the parties have to demonstrate that target business has been accruing consistent losses. There is compelling evidence that without the deal, target business will sink and will be forced to exit the market, and there is no other less anti-competitive alternative to the proposed deal. So as you can see, it's a factual case-to-case assessment, and in fact, the CCI itself has sparingly used it and rather prefers to employ this defense as a last resort. It's not even agreed to, even in the insolvency and bankruptcy cases, we've seen that the CCI has not taken up this defense. However, we think that there may be a change of heart, and it is likely that the CCI will allow failing firm defense as a material argument in the wake of the unprecedented financial damage that has been caused by the pandemic. And just as a live example, very recently, the UK Competition Authority allowed investment by Amazon into a food delivery app called Deliveroo, owing to the financial distress caused by the pandemic and the likelihood of Deliveroo's exit from the market absent the deal. So with this, very quickly, I'll move to the next slide, please, which lists out certain recommendations from a M&A perspective in the post-COVID era. First and foremost is in order to have a smooth sailing approval process, it is advisable that parties undertake a thorough competition law due diligence in order to ensure that both parties have been duly compliant during this period. It should not be the case that the transaction reveals certain skeletons in the closet and the CCI picks it up and begins to investigate. The acquirer of a failing firm must bear in mind the long-term and medium-term viability of acquiring it, because the changing market dynamics and the change in consumer behavior and preferences should definitely be accounted for before making that decision. And to successfully argue a failing firm defense, financial evidence must be provided in order to corroborate the narrative or the storyline to support a timely merger clearance. The others are more regular and ordinary recommendations that we give even in regular M&A transactions, which is have a dialogue with the commission early on, have early consultation. That will go a long way in gaining clarity on the extent and scope of information that is required, and it will hasten the review process. I think with that, I will re-invite Shruti from the Deloitte team to provide us with certain economic nuances that go behind the failing firm defense, and also enlighten the viewers on the issues covered from a forensics sort of perspective in live investigations. Shruti?
Yes, thank you, Anisha. So I think all of us will agree that the distortionary impact of COVID-19 has come alive. Businesses across sectors are facing significant strain on their balance sheets, struggling to stay afloat, and as a consequence are having to make the difficult choice of selling their assets or going out of business. Certain sectors are like more prominent where we are seeing this issue coming up: retail, aviation, fitness, to name a few. More recently, a study was issued by ICRA regarding existential crisis faced by certain airlines. For airlines, fixed costs comprise about 35 to 40%. And the study goes on to mention or goes on to estimate that the industry will lose about 5,000 to 6,000 crores of revenue during the lockdown period. So you can imagine the kind of issues that various sectors are having. While, of course, this provides businesses with an opportunity to acquire assets of these struggling firms, it should be noted that the evidentiary requirements for the acquisition of a failing firm are quite stringent from a competition law perspective. As Anisha mentioned, in the Competition Act, it is listed as one of the factors that the CCI may look into while analyzing mergers. However, there is no further explicit criteria in terms of what is that they would look further, or what is that you would need to prove to establish that why this transaction should go through. So taking on cues from the criteria used by advanced jurisdictions, I'll talk about some of the conditions that other regulators typically look for when they are assessing mergers from a failing firm defense perspective. So there are 4 conditions. The first is the firm insolvent? So that's typically the first step that you have to prove this would mean. So let's say if we were to take the example of the airline sector, the airline that you are wanting to acquire is insolvent as per the accounting terminology. It has no net worth, or is it unable to now pay its debts as they become due, or has alternatively initiated the bankruptcy proceedings. Of course, if bankruptcy proceedings have been initiated, then this first condition is met. The second query that you need to answer is, can the firm be reorganized? Now, what does that mean? That means that the financial struggles that you are seeing are not temporary in nature. the company cannot be reorganized into a financially viable business, either through the target trading out of its difficulties by seeking loans, by restructuring, or by having a new management. The third and the very important condition from the competition compliance perspective is if there is any less competitive alternative available to the transaction. This is an important inquiry. However, at the same time has some practical limitations as it requires demonstrating that serious third-party efforts have been made to shop the firm by other airlines, for example, and that the proposed merger is the least anti-competitive solution available for the firm from an overall market perspective. In other words, this would require showcasing that if the transaction were to not go through, the firm will exit the market, and the market may in fact be more anti-competitive. It may make certain players more superior than they were otherwise would be with the presence of this one, or they would be with if the transaction were to go through. This could happen due to an increase in concentration and strengthening of existing market position of the remaining players in the market. The last condition here is, will the firm's asset will exit the market absent the merger, that everything just goes away and there is no buyer, no partial buyout of any sorts of the assets will happen, and that will be a harm from a consumer perspective in terms of the choices and other things that are available to consumers. So what does it mean for us? While of course we are yet to see how the CCI warms up to the entire failing firm defense, regulators in the past, such as the FTC or the Department of Justice from the US, European Commission, they have not eased the failing firm defense criteria during times of crisis. In fact, during the 2008-9 crisis, the Deputy Director General indicated that the Commission would not be departing from its existing policies regarding failing firms. However, in my view, considering that the economy is likely to confront new and escalating uncertainties as the situation evolves, antitrust regulators may relax or apply the existing criteria a bit leniently. We will see how the situation evolves for us here in India. We still have hopes in terms of how the regulators is going to look at this defense. Slide change, please. So moving on to the last theme for today's discussion, and yet very important dimension that has come into being with COVID-19, and that is work from home, true for most of us. A large number of organizations have graduated to the work from home model, allowing employees to work remotely, as also allowing use of personal devices for official work. Use of platforms enabling mass audio and video calling is on the rise as we speak. This webinar is a consequence, is possible because of that. While it is impressive how the technology has allowed us for this smooth transition, it comes with its own sets of challenges or risks, if I may say, from the perspective of competition law in particular. So there are concerns around data leaks that may result from the use of these new platforms, and also sharing of sensitive information with competitors using personal devices and or accounts. Considering that in the post-COVID scenario, the CCI may expand the scope of the inquiry by also calling in for scrutiny of personal devices of the employees, it has become more important than before to create awareness among employees as to the do's and don'ts. Some of these were highlighted by Anisha and Sagar previously. I will just sort of summarize them very briefly. So it may be ideal to issue a communication protocol or guidelines for reference and circulate it. Information shared should be on a strict need basis with the rationale well documented. Unnecessary exchange should be avoided, and any collaboration undertaken should be in reference to the advisory released by the CCI. In our experience of dealing with competition investigations, particularly cartel matters, increasing use of forensic analysis is being made, wherein data can be retrieved from a wide variety of sources, including laptops, desktops, mobiles, as well as cloud or remote devices and servers that are being used. Please note that such services also allow for recovery of deleted data, and therefore damage once done may be very difficult for you to reverse. While you may ask your employees to delete any such sensitive exchanges, they may leave a trail behind. Other side may have bits and pieces of that particular exchange. So considering that the potential for misuse has risen in the new normal way of operating businesses, it would be our advice to institute adequate safeguards targeted at creating employee awareness, as also the potential risk involved, keeping into the consideration the consequences that it may entail if you're found to be in violation. So yes, I think this is very pertinent point for all businesses out here today in terms of instituting appropriate protocols and procedures for employees. And I think with this, I would like to end. And Sagar, we can move on and let's see what our audience has to say, and if any questions that people have and would like us to answer.
No, well, thank you so much, Shruti. And I think there have been a lot of questions, certainly, and unfortunately, we are restricted for time. But I'll still take up a few questions that came in initially, and whatever gets covered, it's best. One of the first questions is, in these unprecedented situations, how effective is it to compete in lines with competition law? Amit, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure, Sagar. See, the answer is yeah. Whether it is possible, yes, it is possible. Is it easy? Given the kind of distortions which we are talking of, and given that one is not aware in terms of what kind of market structures will evolve, it complying with the law may become a little more complex, and that is where people will need to be very, very careful, and businesses need to kind of be in continuous dialogue with their legal counsels to understand what is possible and what is not possible. And it is better to kind of treat them as business partners while kind of taking decisions, because today one would be looking at situation where all contracts will get renegotiated, whether force majeure is getting applied or irrespective of that. Now, any kind of such negotiation, is it having an impact on competition, or is it somebody is using its dominant position? All of those aspects will need to be looked at, and that is where as I say, it is definitely possible, but it will be a little more complex and a difficult thing to do, but a must thing to do.
Thanks, Amit. This one's for you, Anisha. Can businesses participate in meetings with competitors regarding the impact of COVID on their sectors?
That's a tough one. But the answer to this question would be, to my mind, both yes and no. See, historically, meetings with competitors are usually seen to be tricky under competition law because of the various ramifications that it carries. However, if their discussions are centered around non-price issues, about general industry grows, labor issues in the context of COVID, or lobbying efforts with government, for instance, the need for economic stimulus or grant of GST relief, I believe these are all legit discussions that can happen. But if there are discussions on future price changes or any strategic commercial decisions that where these things are discussed among competitors, this should be a clear no and should be entirely avoided. Similarly, any sort of joint price negotiation or contract negotiation with suppliers, common suppliers or customers, should be completely avoided, because like Amit said, reworking contractual provisions and terms and conditions would perhaps be the need of the hour, and competitors would want to huddle together to be able to get to get more suitable terms and conditions, but that is not something that would be probably compatible with the Competition Act. And I think as a overarching housekeeping and good practices measure, I would strongly advise that even if you're meeting competitors, have an agenda which is prefixed, try and get it vetted by a legal counsel, and please try and document to the extent possible the minutes of the meeting that you have sort of discussed, to ensure that you are on the right side of the law always.
Thanks, Anisha. I think we have time for one more question, and I think this looks relevant from the perspective of Shruti's presentation. In order to regain profitability, is it okay to impose restrictions on resale price charged by distributors?
Interesting question, Sagar. I don't think there is a one-word answer to this query. However, as per the scheme of the Act, resale price maintenance is prohibited if it results in an appreciable adverse effect on competition. Again, tying to the ideas that we spoke about, the rule of reason test and the framework that would get applied. So what are the competition concerns associated with resale price maintenance? Are those of reducing intra-brand competition, as well as, facilitating collusion among the sellers, that you fix the price and everybody is now wanting to sell at that particular price. Therefore, there is no reason to believe that the assessment framework will change in the post-COVID scenario. What may change is the assessment may change. So, for example, you may be required to assess whether the restrictions imposed will be beneficial to consumers and not exclusionary. What do I mean by that? Considering the current scenario, let's say, once the brick and mortar stores are open, resellers may be wanting to give huge discounts to get rid of the existing inventory. And the manufacturers may have concern as to the brand and the reputation that may be at risk as a consequence of that. So while that may give some room for defense for putting in place such restrictions, however, at the same time, there is no yes or no answer to this question.
Yeah.
Assessment will have to be carried out.
No, I think I agree, and I think we can probably also send a detailed response to the audience who sent this question. Thank you all the participants for taking out the time and joining us for this webinar. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we could not take up all the questions. We promise to reach out to you with our responses to the unanswered questions. But we would now like to receive your feedback on this webinar. We'll put a short poll which is available on your screens for now. The poll will be available on your screen for about 30 seconds, and you can select an option by clicking it on your screen. And as everyone responds, I'd like to inform you that when you close this webinar, a short survey window will also open in your browsers, and we'll be grateful if you could fill that too. The PPT and a recording of today's webinar will also be emailed to all of you after this. It may take a few days, but as our team processes the recording, we'll certainly aim to send that out. The poll is now closed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your feedback. And with that, a final thank you for joining us. Stay safe and take care. Goodbye.